The Marvel Universe is filled with a wide, varied, and strange array of characters. Norse and Grecian gods fight alongside the results of human experimentation. Sorcerers are allied with cosmic warriors and men wearing protective battlesuits that their pilots designed. The next stage in human evolution has allied with dragons, fairies, aliens, alternate reality versions of themselves, and an island that walks like a man. And somehow, all of it manages to fit, which is kind of mind-boggling. And in the series that we're currently covering, Marvel is seeking to add in a new faction, or rather, to introduce an old one. In 1970, Jack Kirby left Marvel Comics, feeling slighted by the fame that his oftentimes creative partner, Stan Lee, was getting. Kirby was also annoyed at the ways that Lee would change his stories, sometimes using his powers as the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics to completely rewrite Jack's loose scripts or character ideas. Seeking more control of his creative output, Kirby moved to DC Comics and, after several years of negotiations, began to work on a series of titles that are collectively referred to as the Fourth World, or the Saga of the New Gods, if you prefer. Kirby was fascinated with the origins of life on Earth, with the struggles between good and evil, the past and the present and the future. Those series, while interesting to read, weren't terribly well written though, and all 4 of the books were cancelled. Needing a change, Kirby then returned to Marvel Comics, and he picked up on some of his new gods' themes and concepts in a new title, called The Eternals. As with the New Gods material, though, the Eternals did not live up to their name. The original volume was cancelled at issue 19, and Marvel has struggled to find a place for them ever since. We're currently taking a look at 2006's 7-issue miniseries, The Eternals, written by Neil Gaiman, with artwork by John Romita Jr., inks by Danny Miki and Tom Palmer, and colors by Matt Hollingsworth and Paul Mounts. This volume set out to reinterpret the Eternals in a more modern setting, one which directly tied them into the ongoing events and power structures of the then-current universe. To that end, we have met medical extern Mark Curry, who has been either annoyed by or harassed, depending on your perspective, by Ike Harris. Ike thinks that he, and Mark, are members of a long-lost tribe of superhumans named the Eternals, which were created by a race of space giants called the Celestials. 1,000,000 years ago, the Eternals went to war with a monstrous race called the Deviants, also created by the Celestials. And upon winning the war, the Eternals helped usher proto-humanity into the modern age. But something happened, and the Eternals no longer know of their history at all, and no one seems to know anything about them. Mark thinks that Ike is totally batshit crazy,
no swearing,
and that Ike should leave him alone, despite the amazing recuperative powers that Ike demonstrates after being beaten, exploded, and falling off of a building. To that end, Mark released Ike to the care of 2 men. 2 men that we know were the ones who attacked Ike in the first place. Ike's delusions would also indicate that a man named Druig, who works for the Voroshiken embassy, is also an Eternal. In an attempt to drum up tourism for his young country, Druig has hired Cersei, a flighty young woman who may also be an Eternal, to throw a massive party. Invited to that party are some of New York's most interesting people, which includes Dr. Thena Elliott, another potential Eternal, who currently works as a non-lethal weapons developer for Stark Unlimited. The Eternals seem to be gathering together, although whether that's by the hand of fate or by someone's devious plan remains to be seen. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 17.2. Weren't you an Avenger? Issue 2 opens with Ike Harris chained and imprisoned inside of a water tank. The smaller man of the 2 who attacked him and who took him from the hospital at the end of issue 1, is on the phone reporting about Ike's situation. The unseen party on the other end comments on Ike's impressive recuperative abilities. Not only has he survived the bombing, the subsequent fall to the New York pavement, but now they are reporting that he is breathing in water. The unseen figure suggests that these two dudes up their experimental murder game. Small Guy says that he doesn't approve of going nuclear, so they'll try an acid bath next, see if that kind of damage sticks. He orders the bigger guy to pull Ike out, and when the bigger guy asks what kind of acid they're going to use, his word balloon is shaped and colored differently than normal. Despite looking human here, his speech balloon resembles the deviants from the previous issue. If the acid doesn't kill him, what'll they try next? They gonna go nuclear? The smaller man groans at his compatriot. Don't you start. Okay, so we learn a few things in this small scene. We immediately pick up on Ike's story and further confirm that he doesn't just heal very well, he literally adapts quickly. Even Wolverine, famous for his healing factor, can be drowned, but Ike cannot. He just breathes underwater. We also learn that these two dudes are deviants, and that they're either working for or with someone else. The conversation feels like the unseen party is making suggestions to them more than demands, so I lean towards a partnership. I'm not sure why the smaller guy is so against nuclear power, or if the big guy was just teasing him about it on the way out. I like the voice that these two characters have throughout the scene, though. Like, sure, they're goons, but there's just a little bit more to them than that. They're also not idiots, judging by the way that they're conversing with each other. They may be relatively simple characters, but they're seemingly well-educated and they know what they're doing. It's a fun little scene, to be quite honest. We cut to the hospital, where we find Mark Curry leaving work after a 28-hour shift. It's pouring as well, and he's half out of it as he goes to cross the street. He didn't even look at the traffic, and suddenly he can hear the brakes of a car squealing as it approaches him. Then, instantly, he's on the other side of the road. Did he just... No, he's just out of it. He's just tired. God, he needs some coffee. So Mark goes to Coffee Jones and orders a drink. When the barista calls out the order, Mark reaches for the coffee. But so does another hand. Cersei's. Their fingers brush, their eyes meet, and they smile. Soon they're sitting at a table, chatting, really hitting it off. Cersei wishes that she could invite him to the party that she's planning. That would be so much fun. But Mark doesn't think that he could get the time off from the hospital anyway. Cersei rests her hand upon his. It really feels like she's known him forever. I would say that's sweet, if Cersei didn't already demonstrate that she's a professional flake last issue who commonly steals her best friend's boyfriend. Interesting that Mark and Cersei seem immediately drawn to each other, though, while Mark couldn't really stand Ike at all last issue. Although I suppose that may just be a layer of physical attraction on top of that, so, I guess we'll wait and see. And then, we're going to Hollywood, baby. There we find the child star Sprite, who is being interviewed by a reporter for the New York Times. It mostly seems like your standard interview stuff. Establishes Sprite as a child sensation. Apparently there's a petition to get him performed in New York City, so maybe not that standard of an interview. But Sprite prefers California, and he does not plan to leave. The reporter starts to ask about Sprite's parents, and the kid is clearly uncomfortable by this line of questioning, but he doesn't dodge it. The reporter couldn't find any information on Sprite's parents, nothing at all. Sprite explains that his parents didn't have his best interests at heart, so he hired a lawyer and got himself emancipated. Now, he has a lawyer and a manager instead of a mother and a father, and they do have his best interests at heart. Said manager, Mimi, swoops in. Sprite has been called to set. They'll have to finish the interview after. As Sprite and Mimi go, Mimi apologizes for the reporter asking about the parents. She told him not to. Sprite asks if the man is going to get to finish his interview, And Mimi says, "Absolutely not." The young man nods. "Good." Jesus, there are so many characters in this book. Sprite looks, to me, to be about 10 or 11 years old in a simple t-shirt and jeans combo, although I will freely admit that I am bad with children's age. His hair is a light orangish brown, waxed to stand up a little bit in the front. He feels very in control during this scene, and remember, Ike claimed that Sprite was an Eternal last issue. So despite looking like a child, Sprite may actually be very, very millions of years old level of mature. The rest of the scene is meant to explore the hole that exists in Sprite's story. His lack of parents, a lack of information about those parents at all, his form of autonomy, his rise to fame and fortune. Given the sheer number of Eternals that we've seen in New York, is Sprite choosing to stay away from them, or was he banished? Maybe he can't go to New York City. There's also a moment when the reporter says that Sprite is the biggest child musician since Michael Jackson, and Sprite retorts that he plans to grow up. That is interesting, as I'm fairly certain that the Eternals cannot physically age. Sprite was always a child, and he will always be a child, unless he has something else up his sleeve. Back in New York, we find Mark inside of the office of a doctor who is basically questioning why Mark, who is not a doctor, remember, drugged a patient who was the sole survivor of a terrorist attack and thus was the sole witness to two strange men who are not doctors in any medical registry that they know of. Mark explains about the delusions that Ike told him about and how he feared for his safety. The doctor scolds Mark, saying that he's met over 200 people claiming to be Jesus Christ himself, and yet he's never released any of them from medical care. As the doctor goes on, Mark's mind is interrupted by a voice. The voice pleads for his help. "They're trying to kill me," the voice says, "and he needs Makari's help. Please." The doctor now pauses, noticing the slip in Mark's concentration. When Mark assures him that he's okay, the doctor continues, placing Mark on suspension pending a review of his medical records. And there's a police officer who would like to speak to him as well. Mark gets through that interview as well, although he isn't really sure how. They took a urine sample and copied his license too, but he did tell the police everything. Or, well, most of everything. He did not tell them that he had dreamed of Ike before meeting him, or of dreaming of the Celestials and the Deviants and Icarus saving his life like 1,000,000 years ago. He didn't tell them that because he's starting to think that maybe, just maybe, the dreams are real. And honestly, he would rather be crazy. You know, I hadn't considered the consequences of Mark drugging Ike and letting those two dudes take him at the end of the last issue. Given that this book was published in 2006, shortly after the Marvel Universe got a thematic grounding thanks to the Civil War event, I like the focus on real-world consequences. I also like the idea that a scared Mark let these strange men take Ike because he is afraid of what Ike represents. Ike is everything strange and unknown and represents a change from the world that Mark knows to one that he doesn't understand. But with him gone, everything's going to stay normal and Mark will be fine. Sure, it isn't the right thing to do, but it is a very human thing to do, and Gaiman is making sure that Mark feels like a person and not a superhero. Elsewhere in New York, Cersei and Abby are walking and talking as they walk around the city, with Abby encouraging her friend to invite the hot doctor that she just met to her party. It's not like the Verose Hykins will know that he isn't famous, right? Say he's a big-time doctor and you're fine. As they're walking, they pass a bearded homeless man and Cersei tucks some bills into his held-out can. As they pass, he shouts, "They took it all away! They took it all away! They took it all away! All one! All one! All one!" Neither woman seems to notice. Yeah, alright, man. We touch base with Ike for about a page as he's being dragged towards a smelter. The smaller man theorizes that he probably has a protective energy field, like one that is so tight that it's basically a layer of his skin, and that is what's protecting him from harm. His interior organs are hyper-efficient and self-repairing, allowing him to survive any damage done there, including the removal of those organs. They've tried drowning him, bathing him in acid, tossing him in a car crusher, and yet Ike is somehow still alive. This smelter probably won't even do anything. But let's find out, shall we? Then we bounce to Mark, who is shaving when Cersei calls him on the phone. She invites him to her party, and he accepts, suddenly having a lot of free time. As he hangs up, visions of Icarus, and it is Icarus in costume, not Ike in his regular clothes, being burned in liquid hot metal, flash into Mark's mind. He begs Makkari for help. They're trying to kill him. And Mark shouts to Ike to stay out of his head. And then it is time to partay. Thena and her husband arrive with no trouble. Mark arrives and Cersei is impressed by how well he managed to clean up. She tells him, by the way, that tonight he's the editor for the magazine Foreign Policy Monthly. Cute friend of the party organizer just didn't cut it. Mark is nervous about having to pretend, but sure, he'll play along. He pauses before leaving, looking at Cersei, who is trying to return to her job. Cute friend of the organizer? Huh? Cersei taps his nose. Not now, cute boy. I am working. We pull out a panel to take in the party. Mark is stumbling at being an editor, but he's a fast thinker, and he's doing okay. Thena chats with her husband, then another weapons-developing scientist. Some of the contestants from America's Next Superhero are present as well. Eventually, the host of the party, Druig, who is addressed as the Deputy Prime Minister of Orozhaika, is called away for a phone call. He isn't impressed by the people of this country at all. Did you talk to the editor of Foreign Policy Monthly? What an idiot. He leans into his aide. The scientists are all here, though? His aide says that Dr. Thena is present, but not many others, and she's a good enough get for Druig. Then the money has been well spent so far. When he finally reaches the phone, we learn that, well, it looks like Druig is planning on kidnapping some people or holding some of them hostage, maybe a little bit of both. The way we're told the plans is very vague. The men who are doing the job think that they have been hired by the Russian Secret Service, a lie which pleases Druig. Maybe that's why his aide was afraid regarding Moscow last issue, that they're going to get the blame for this event, and they will find them. In any case, none of this is going to be good for our cast, I bet. We watch the party for a bit longer, following Thena's husband, Thomas, who is slamming back that champagne. Eventually, he has to pee, and he asks Cersei for directions to the bathroom. He follows the directions, but all of the doors are labeled in Vorozhaikin, and he's a little bit tipsy, so he goes into the wrong door. Instead of a bathroom, he finds a large group of black-clad men, well-armed and armored. They all train their guns on Thomas, their sights silently taking him in. His eyes go wide as his brain puts two and two together. He spins, turning to run, but silenced bullets suddenly tear through his body. His body falls into the hallway, dead. Up the hallway, the party is confused by the sounds. Cersei takes center stage, joking that the fireworks must have started early. She then introduces their hosts for the night, Druig and the Vorozhaikin ambassador. Having alerted people to their presence, the armed men suddenly charge the ballroom earlier than they were supposed to, telling the partygoers to gather in the center of the room. They've already killed one of them, and they will kill more if they have to. They order everyone to empty their pockets onto the floor, including their phones. The ambassador demands to know what this is all about, indicating his level of intelligence, while Druig calmly goes along with the orders. Thena then asks the superhero contestants to do something, but they answer that they can't. They all signed waivers in order to be on the TV show, and if they use their powers without permission, then they lose. Thena blinks at the young man. She's very familiar with the sound of gunfire. Those weren't fireworks, were they? and her husband is missing. Thena's eyes go wide. Oh God. Wherever he is, Ike knows that the others are in danger. He has to help them. They could create the Unimind. There are 4 of them there. They can do it. That's enough. But the smaller man says nah, he won't be helping them. They have him strapped onto some kind of energy output port. Pink energy burns in the air around him. Ike, he already looks thinner and dried out. He asks who these 2 men are, and the smaller man says that he can think of them like humanitarians. Then he activates the device that Ike is on, and in a bright flash he is burned to a skeleton, and then to ash. He is utterly vaporized. Back at the party, Cersei and Mark huddle together. They talk, but not out loud. It's like they're talking inside of each other's minds. The men separate the scientists out and escort them outside to a waiting helicopter. One of them tells the other group to kill the rest of the party. A man asks about Druig, and the first man reiterates, "Kill them all." The men inside open fire. As they do, a bullet streaks towards Mark, but then it seems to slow down. It's like everything freezes around Mark. The bullet just stops. Mark reaches out for it, amazed, but when he touches it, it explodes in a burst of heat and light. Cursing at the sudden pain, Mark examines his hand, and it's fine. If someone was moving at hyperspeed, it makes sense that you would need, lightweight armor, maybe red and white in color, with a helmet and a visor, and we see the Makari armor start to fade into existence on Mark. But as he keeps thinking, the armor begins to fade away. He can't just run and move everyone out of the bullet's path. He would be going so fast that he would either hurt them or kill them in the process. Touching the bullets is clearly out of the question, as they will harm him. After all, they are hot after being fired, and their kinetic energy has to go somewhere. Mark continues to run options, lost in his thoughts. Thena is crying as she heads towards the helicopter. Cersei is in shock. And we have a mystery character saying that this is all happening too soon, and the issue ends. As far as second issues go, this one works well. Our cast is starting to come together, we have something resembling a greater plot coalescing, and by that I mean someone manipulating Druig's hostage/kidnapping plan, and everything feels like it just took one major step forward. That's good storytelling. Everyone feels consistent with their portrayal from the last issue, and that's great as well. I am a bit puzzled about the inclusion of the contestants from America's Next Superhero. I just don't understand why they are here in our overall narrative structure. But, we do still have some issues to go before the end of this, and I'm assuming that we'll see this idea resolved, or at least brought closer to what we're reading about as we get there. That goes under the wait and see category. No, the biggest problem that I have with this issue is actually the Ike being tortured stuff. And not even because Ike is getting tortured, which I feel mildly bad about. No, the thing that I don't like about it is Gaiman has presented Ike's story to us in issue 1 as if it was all crazy guy talk. But here, we see Ike surviving things that a person shouldn't be able to survive. Like I said before, even Wolverine would have trouble coming back from some of these experiments, and he is one of the most accomplished healers in the Marvel Universe. Mark's argument from the last issue still stands. There could be any number of superhuman reasons why Ike survives all of this, but it definitely reads more like a confirmation of Ike's story than a denial. There's also this really neat moment when he dies there at the very end. When he gets caught up in that energy burst and his skeleton is showing, the 3 circles that rest on his chest in his Icarus form are present, as if they are a physical part of his body, almost as if they're bone. None of the rest of his Icarus costuming shows through, so I don't know if the circles have some kind of greater meaning, or maybe they actually are part of his body but underneath his skin, and again, we still have issues to go, so I'm hoping that we'll get some answers as we continue to go on. It does just continue to solidify the idea that Ike is not lying, he is an Eternal named Icarus, and everybody else just hasn't caught up to him mentally yet. And all of that is assuming that Ike survives. And this is comic books, so, despite the fact that he's dead, he could definitely survive. I particularly dig the science bit with Mark when he's thinking at super speed as well. Once again, we see his more grounded, more realistic, more analytical take on what's happening. He isn't even questioning his ability to do this. He is just analyzing what's happening as it's happening around him. So he still feels like the same character, even as his Makari aspects are being highlighted, which is visually shown by the armor beginning to manifest. This is a good combination of both storytelling from a writing perspective and storytelling from an artistic perspective. This was super neat to me. This book is also definitely not a good standalone issue. It definitely reads as a chapter 2 of a book, as opposed to a single standalone issue, but again, that's a small taste issue. Overall, this is very good. I'm happy. Having ended issue 2 on a tense, life-threatening hostage-taking situation, Gaiman and Romita Jr. picked things right up with a calm move to San Francisco and a pleasant conversation. That's not exactly exciting, but okay. Not like we have a choice here. We open with Mark Curry sitting in a large, plush green chair inside of a clean, well-lit office. To our left is a large wall-sized glass window, giving us an unfettered view of the city below. Whoever Mark's talking to, they are off-panel and we can't see them. Mark knows that his story sounds crazy. It sounds like a hallucination, he knows that, he gets it. He honestly wishes that it was a hallucination. That would make more sense. But it all happened. It was all real. Sure, the listener replies, just tell me what happened. Mark then goes into it. He was at Cersei's party at the Voroshiken embassy, and then bad things started to happen. Some dudes in combat gear killed someone, kidnapped the scientists, and then opened fire on the remaining guests. That is when time seemed to stop for Mark, the whole world around him turning blue. He figured that he couldn't move the people, the future victims, without harming them. He couldn't touch the bullets without harming himself, so he would need to do something else, and fast. Mark wasn't sure how long this effect would last, so he scooped up a metal vase and dumped it out. Then he caught all of the bullets in it, took all of the guns from the gunman, and then found an empty office with a big safe in it. He put the vase inside of the safe and closed it, hoping that that would be effective in trapping the bullets. That just left the gunmen themselves to deal with, and Mark wasn't really sure how to deal with them. He was in the process of running back to them when the world started to turn red. Things were speeding up. So, all of a sudden, Mark crashes into the gunman with all the speed of a race car. Amazingly, somehow, he wasn't hurt, but the men definitely were. Nearby are two of the contestants from America's Next Superhero, the blonde girl Grace and a black boy who goes unnamed. Grace says that they should do something, they need to help out here, but the black boy wishes her good luck. He isn't going to risk his spot on the show to play hero now. Grace pulls off her billowing skirt, and don't worry, she has on some swimsuit bottoms or something like that, and then she rushes into the pile of goons to help kick butt. One of the men pulls out a knife, but it's suddenly transformed into a rose. Now unarmed, he gets a kick to the flooping face from Grace. Nearby, we see Cersei, whose hands are splayed out as if she was casting a spell or an effect, alluding to the idea that the knife to Rose thing was caused by her. But her eyes are wide, she is clearly confused. Behind her, running from the conflict, is Druig, who seems to have been watching her. Did he see the transformation happen? Does he recognize Cersei as an Eternal now? Does he even know that he's an Eternal at all? Who knows, and we ain't addressing that crap now. Cersei pulls Mark out of the tumble and asks if he's okay. Mark doesn't really hear her, though. His mind is racing with thoughts of what it means to have superpowers. If he really does have powers, then he's going to have to register with the government and get trained, become a superhero. And he doesn't want that. He doesn't want anything to do with any of that. And then, flooping Iron Man smashes through the patio door, asking what's going on here. A bunch of different people respond, giving him an idea of the general situation, but no one mentions Mark's heroics, because they were happening too fast for the human mind to comprehend them. Mark didn't say anything because Iron Man was the face of the Superhuman Registration Act, the top dog in the Marvel Universe at the time, and we have already established that Mark doesn't want anything to do with that. Cersei tells Iron Man that there were some scientists who were taken away to a helicopter, and Iron Man blasts through the ceiling to find them. While he's gone, Mark returns to Cersei's side, nervously trying to ask about seeing her again. But then Iron Man returns, reporting that the helicopter is long gone. He asks Cersei if he can speak with her, and they peel off. Once they're finished, Cersei returns to Mark, tells him that she's glad that they met, wishes him a happy life, and then leaves. And then Mark fought to remember every little thing that Ike Harris told him about being a superpowered god figure. He maxed out his credit card, flew to California, and somehow managed to get an unsupervised meeting with child star Sprite, who was revealed to be the other half of this conversation. Ike told Mark, by the way, that Sprite is also an Eternal, which is why he's here. Sprite leans forward in his chair. Do you think that's true, Mark? Mark shrugs. Maybe. Ike was right about Mark having superpowers. And when he did get his superpowers, it was like he connected to something bigger than himself. Like some kind of shared consciousness, like just for a second. Does that sound crazy to you? Mark asks, because it sounds crazy to him. No, Sprite replies. It actually doesn't sound crazy at all. The thing in that story that really stands out to him is what happened to Ike Harris, and who were those two men who took him. We actually move over to those guys next, so let's pause for a minute and take a look at this opening, because I don't much care for it. Up to this point, I've been pretty pleased with how Gaiman's been handling this narrative. There have been some hiccups, sure, but nothing that's really bad or annoying. The tone has remained pretty consistent, the overall narrative has been interesting, and the characters have been steadily written throughout. That's some solid writing work. But this opening scene for me is a huge stumbling block. First off, I don't like the shift in tone between issues 2 and 3. Rather than writing this issue as if it is a continuation of issue 2, Gaiman opens us up slowly and then ramps back into the action. All of the tension that we felt during the hostage situation last issue, all of that panic and confusion from Mark, who, remember, is our lead character, and so we sympathize with him the most out of our cast, is all gone. We open on a nice, slow, calm conversation that's happening after the hostage situation is resolved, so we know that no matter what happens in that flashback scene, it ends fine for Mark. He's clearly okay. Secondly, the basic idea of how Mark ended the hostage situation doesn't really work for me either. Gaiman established last issue that the bullets expended their kinetic energy when they were touched. The bullet literally exploded when Mark poked it. But Mark just sweeps all of the bullets up inside of that vase. So they should all be exploding upon contact with it. I want to make the excuse that the bullet only exploded because Mark was the one who touched it, and thus it moved at the same speed that he did, allowing it to expend all of its kinetic energy in one go. But Mark is the one touching the vase, which is then touching the bullets. If this is some kind of time relativity thing, then each of those items should have sped up when Mark touched them, allowing for the release of kinetic energy and allowing the bullets to explode. So that idea doesn't work for me. Like, if Gaiman hadn't set up the bullet scene at the end of last issue, I would have no problem with believing that Mark could move so fast that he could just scoop all of the bullets up, and when this time-stopped effect finished, they would just move like normal inside of the safe. This would basically feel like the Quicksilver scene from the X-Men Days of Future Past movie, which I don't like, but it would conform to our modern understanding of how time would feel to someone moving at super speed. And given that this comic came out 8 years before that movie, the understanding of physics is impressive. But it is also inconsistent between our two issues, so bleh. I like the small hint of Cersei's powers when she turns the knife into a rose, and in the background of that panel we see Druig watching her. Did he see that transformation happen? Does he know about Cersei's powers now? She certainly seems clueless still, but did Druig know all along? It doesn't feel like it, but, maybe he's just a manipulative jerk type of dude. He did, after all, hire the gunmen to kidnap the scientists while pretending to work for Russia, so, he sure does seem like a manipulative jerk. Which brings me to my third problem point, which is the inclusion of Iron Man. I like seeing this story begin to line up more with the Marvel Universe, yes, and Iron Man is actually a really good character to begin that process with. But I absolutely hate this entrance. Romita Jr. has Iron Man just push through the patio wall. Like, his body is standing straight up, his arms are held against his sides, it's like he froze in place and then just slammed into the wall and it happened to break. There's no character here, there's no personality, this doesn't feel like a human being tackling through the wall or punching through it or even launching a missile into it to blow it up and then he flies through. No, he just smashes bodily through in the least interesting and least human way possible. And I don't even like the surrounding circumstances of his being there, honestly. Wouldn't he have seen the helicopter flying away from the building? We ended the last issue with the scientists still being loaded onto the helicopter. Then the gunmen opened fire, and then Mark's super speed time stop thing happened. So that helicopter could not have gotten far away. Iron Man should totally have been able to either stop it or follow it at least. I don't like him smashing into the party and being clueless either, as it shows that he didn't do any investigative work before smashing in. He didn't use heat sensors to read the room, or X-ray vision to see the layout of the building. There was no explanation for why he's there, or how he even learned of the hostage situation. If you want to say that he heard the gunshots, okay, I could honestly believe that he was flying by and his sensors picked up the gunfire, great. But then wouldn't you want to know where the hostages were versus where the bad guys were when you busted into a hostage situation? Wouldn't you want to subdue the bad guys as quickly as possible and not shove your way through a wall and give them time to kill the hostages? It's really nice to see the Marvel Universe start to come through this narrative in a more forceful way, but I really think that this was kind of the worst way to do it. And then we have the moments with Sprite. These actually aren't complaints, this is just a general roundup, because Sprite seems really accepting of all of this information that Mark has just dumped into his lap. Like, he doesn't bat an eye at Iron Man showing up, or Mark having superpowers, or the implication that he is part of a group of ancient super beings. He does ask Mark if he does still have the super speed thing going on, and Mark confirms that no, he hasn't been able to do it again, actually. And that seems to be enough of an answer for Sprite as he focuses on the men who kidnapped Ike. He seems pretty cool with all of this. I would expect an 11-year-old to be excited, maybe confused, maybe a little bit scared. Remember how Ike appearing on Mark's fire escape kind of scared him? It made him think of getting a weapon? Sprite just sits here and listens and accepts. Something ain't right about that boy. Speaking of those two guys, we find the short guy and the tall guy entering a stone stairway. The short guy is talking about religion and how they are preparing for today's prayers. He sparks a lighter, lights a torch, and then the two men shed their skin like lizards. Oh my god! The smaller man is revealed to be a small, short lump of greenish flesh. A wide face is set in his torso, with no nose and crooked, oddly shaped teeth. A matching face rests above it, but there is no neck there. It's just like a lump on top of its shoulders. The taller man is thin and lanky, with flailing tentacles where his arms should be. These two men have just been revealed as deviants, mankind's ancient slavers, and enemies of the Eternals. Short guy now does a reading from the Book of Krask. The taller one gazes upon a large stone wall, which depicts the events that the shorter one is reading. He says that the Golden Celestial created them and gave them dominion over the earth. The other Celestials were jealous of his creations, though, and turned upon him. They tricked him, turned his armor black, and trapped him in a deep sleep within the earth. But one day he shall rise again, and the changing people, capital C, capital P, will rise with him. So I mentioned with some of our previous story elements that Gaiman was trying to walk a fine line between establishing the Eternals' back matter, yet selling those ideas as strange and alien within even the Marvel Universe. Again, Mark Curry is our audience stand-in, and we are supposed to be skeptical and unbelieving until things get so weird that we have to accept them. For Mark, that moment is the super speed moment at the party. He cannot deny that something is happening with him. Was Ike Harris right? Mark isn't sure yet, but he is going to find out. But then the frustrating thing is that Gaiman has moments like these, which explicitly confirms that all of the Eternals' back matter is real. We have now seen the Deviants. They have murals and skin suits and a freaking religion, which I actually like. It's really easy to write off the Deviants as just mindless monsters, because they really are monstrous looking, but if they've been around for thousands of years, they would have language and writing and probably form their own religious beliefs. So that stuff is all neat. That's great world building, but I'm not sure why we're learning about it now. We know that the Deviants, or at least these two Deviants, are searching for how to kill an Eternal, as evidenced by their eventual murder of Ike. This religious moment would also indicate that the Deviants are working towards a specific day. They read that the Golden Celestial will one day awaken, and the changing people will rise with him. So does killing Ike play a part in that? Is that part of the ceremony or whatever it is that it's going to take to wake up the dreaming Celestial? Did they only want to kill Ike because he was the only one who knew the truth, and thus he was the only one who could stand in their way? I also like their basic designs. Romita Jr. kind of gives all of his monsters the same kind of basic shape, but they do all look like monsters, so it works. Moving on, we find Abigail looking for Cersei in what looks like a park later that night. A strong breeze tosses Cersei's long hair as Abby asks her what's wrong. She always comes here when something's bothering her. Cersei refuses to answer, not even bothering to play the game of dodging the question. She just doesn't. Abigail asks if it was something about the hostage thing, and no. Or maybe it's the Mark thing. He's called a few times, and no. We move inside of Cersei's mind, where we flash back to her conversation with Iron Man. He starts by thanking her for helping to defuse that situation with the kidnappers, but then he points out that, former Avenger or not, Cersei needs to be registered if she's going to be doing superheroics. This confuses Cersei. She is not an Avenger. Iron Man is like, okay, if that's how you want to play it, fine, but you should still register since you have superpowers. Cersei protests even harder here. She wasn't an Avenger, she doesn't have superpowers, she didn't do anything, man. Iron Man finally gives up, telling her that sooner or later she's going to have to pick a side, alluding to the superhuman civil war that Iron Man was currently caught up in with Captain America. As the memory ends, Cersei asks Abigail what will happen to her if she really is some kind of freak. Abby just smiles. Then they'll tell Banana Splits Todd, and he'll break out some champagne. This is a pretty cute scene. When we first met Cersei, it's really hard for me to take her seriously, as she clearly doesn't take anything seriously herself. She is flippant about not having a job, about needing to borrow large sums of money, about stealing Abby's boyfriend. Everything feels like a joke to her. Even this party that she helped to organize, it really feels more like a whim than a passion project or something that she's invested in. But this run-in with Iron Man clearly bothers her. That's how unsettled she is by it. As a longtime Marvel fan, this is the single most interesting part of the comic for me. While the first volume of Avengers isn't something that I'm very familiar with, I have read a handful of issues, and some of them did feature Cersei. Cersei originally appeared in 1976's The Eternals comic, but that series was honestly treated as a standalone series at the time, outside of the rest of Marvel's continuity. In the 80s, though, other authors began to incorporate the Eternals into their own comics, and Cersei began to make appearances in Captain America and then in the Avengers as well. Eventually, she was asked to join the team full-time, and she was a regular member until Avengers Volume 1, issue 375, where she traveled to another universe and basically just disappeared for a while. She had made a few appearances in the broader Marvel Universe since, but never as a leading lady, and Iron Man clearly remembers her here. But she doesn't seem to know him at all. She denies ever having been an Avenger, or even the fact that she has superpowers, alluding once more to the fact that something has happened to all of the Eternals. We still have a really big information gap between what Cersei used to be and who she is now, and that gap is clearly beginning to bother her. Next, we move to the home of Pirkrish, the aide or secretary or second-in-command or whatever of Druig. He appeared before in issue 1 when Druig hired Cersei to act as the party organizer. He appears to be at home in a very sparse kitchen with a single overhead light on. A bowl of food rests on the table before him, and he eats from it calmly, thinking that he's safe. From the surrounding shadows steps Druig. Pirkrish is startled by his sudden appearance. They looked for him after the party, but they couldn't find him anywhere. Druig explains that he decided to leave before the police could start to ask uncomfortable questions. It was like, once he decided to leave, no one could stop him. Fascinatingly, as he passed by each guest, their deepest fears opened up before him in his mind. He could push those thoughts, too, which is demonstrated when a female cop does try to stop him. Druig's eyes glow pink as he brings up all of that fear, and suddenly she just collapses. No one seemed to even notice Druig as he smiles and walks away, even as they rush to help her. Pirkrish has moved to the sink to clean out his bowl. Druig, now sitting at the table, asks where the scientists have been taken. Pirkrish tries to lie, saying that he doesn't know, but Druig knows that he's lying. Pirkrish quietly pulls open a kitchen drawer and draws out a short-nosed six-shooter from it. The scientists are going to work for Druid now, not Voroshaika. Druig announces that he had been thinking too small before. Pirkrish says that he's not going to tell Druig anything, and then he orders him to stand. Calmly, not even shocked by the gun, Druig does. "What will you do with the body?" he asks. Druig then turns slightly, a sly smile on his face. "It's a good thing your parents never caught you wearing your mother's clothes." "Yes," he says. "You would have been so humiliated, Pirkrish. Your mother would have cried and screamed for your father. Your father would have dragged you out into the street for the whole village to see. The girls would have laughed at him, and the boys would have thrown rocks." And as Druig says this, we see inside of Pirkrish's mind, and we see him as a young boy dressed in his mother's slip, crying on the ground. In reality, though, Pirkrish is frozen on the spot. Tears run down his face as the emotions drown him. Druig asks again, "Where are the scientists?" And now Pirkrish tells him. "Who are you working for?" Druig asks. "The Prosperity Party," Pirkrish answers. "Druig is of the old ways, and they needed him gone." Druig hums in satisfaction. "You know, Pirkrish, the shame would not be so bad if you put that gun in your mouth and pulled the trigger." And he does. Gone unnoticed in that scene, because I couldn't think of a good way to work it in without disrupting the flow, is Druig saying that he felt a moment when he connected to something else. So between Mark's powers awakening and his own connection to something greater, and Druig doing the same, although much less heroically, it might be safe to assume that Cersei probably had a similar experience. This could also be part of why she is so freaked out. Maybe it's not Iron Man that freaked her out, or having powers, but this connection that she felt to something else. I'll freely admit that I haven't read much featuring the Eternals as lead characters, but I don't remember a telepathic connection between them all. Cersei was telepathic, if I remember correctly, and she did have a brief telepathic moment with Mark at the end of issue 2, but I don't remember there being anything greater than that. I like Druig's demonstration of his powers here, though. Ordinarily, I would scoff at this kind of emotional manipulation because it really takes some good storytelling to sell those kinds of moments. But this scene really works for me. That moment with Pierre Crish really sells how overpowering the emotions that he's feeling are. Like, he was so caught up in them that he couldn't do anything else. And the moment when he shot himself, Romita Jr. does a great job with it. There are basically 3 panels of Druig's face, fully in shadow, save for his glowing pink eyes. There's a burst of blood in the middle panel as the shot happens, and then his satisfied grunt. It's really creepy, and it works well. There's not even a sound effect for the gun going off, because you understand what's happening there, and I really like that. Druig might be an Eternal, but he is also meant to be a creep, and possibly a villain. I find that interesting, because we tend to simplify whole groups of people, right? That's part of what human beings do. And it would be really easy to judge that all Eternals are good guys because they have superpowers or because they fight against the deviants. But Druig immediately shows us that might not be true. That's not bad storytelling. Pierre Crish told Druig that the scientists were being kept in a lighthouse before transporting them elsewhere, and that is where we cut to next. We're told by narration that Thena is being fed only once a day, and it has been 3 days since she was taken. One man enters the cell and sets the plate of food down, while another one keeps a gun lazily trained on Thena. Thena, for her part, is still dressed in her party dress, although it is torn and worn in places. Her hands are tied together and attached to a nearby wall with some rope. There's a bit of room for her to move, but not really a lot. She's definitely a prisoner. Thena moves forward as the men arrive, trying to reason with them. They killed her husband, so now her son is alone. She needs to get back to him. Please, look in her purse. She has a photo of him. Maybe if they see him, they'll understand. Please. The men, both of whom are wearing face masks, don't respond at all. The one that had the food stands up. As they prepare to leave, Thena's mind begins to race. Strategies and tactics flash through her mind, faster than she can actually track. When an idea is deemed unfit, it's thrown away, and another one is considered. Finally, she settles on a course of action. Thena grabs the fork from her plate and flings it into the eye of the first guard, causing him to drop his pistol. She then tosses the plate into the face of the second guard, catching him right across the eyes. Then she snatches up the pistol, but she chooses not to shoot them. Not out of mercy, no. She doesn't do it so that the sound won't attract attention. She then grabs a cell phone from out of one of their holsters and starts to dial. At Avenger's tower in New York City, we find Iron Man at a computer terminal. Apparently, he does not have Bluetooth access to the Avengers database. He requests all information on the former Avenger called Cersei. For a moment, just a moment, an image of Cersei flickers on the computer screen, but then it's gone. There are no records, the computer reports. This confuses Iron Man, but he doesn't get a chance to dig any deeper yet. He has an incoming call. Tony answers it, and it's Thena Elliott. After introducing herself, she tells him to trace the call. While she's waiting for him, Thena also grabs a knife off of the nearest guard and cuts her way free of her restraints. She smiles as she hears a sonic boom. Iron Man has arrived. And downstairs, we see him move through the rest of the kidnapping force with ease. Finally, he reaches Thena's cell, and she calmly greets him. He's surprised to see the downed guards and asks Thena who did this, and she's kind of surprised herself. I did. I guess. I could have killed them, but I didn't. Then she turns to Iron Man. Do you know who's watching my son? Iron Man pauses. No. Actually, he doesn't. He should have checked. Thena stands up, telling him that it's okay. He's a busy guy, after all, holding down 2 jobs. She gets it. Then she tells him to take her home. Iron Man protests she should probably be looked at by medical services first, but Thena is adamant. Her husband is dead, her son is alive and alone right now. She needs to get to him, and he owes her this. Finally, the issue ends in the cold of Antarctica. The camera dives down into the thick ice shelves, eventually closing in on a series of human-shaped depressions within the ice. Thin red lines, denoting some form of technology, run through the depressions. We end on one of them, that has a body inside of it. We see the body of Icarus, covered in a full-body red jumpsuit. A computer announces that Icarus has been completed, preparing to reactivate. So okay, we know that Icarus is going to be back. Clearly there's some kind of technological means of recreating or resurrecting an Eternal, but obviously we don't know a lot on that yet. We'll learn more about that as the series goes on, I'm sure, and it would be a much more interesting note to end on if anybody gave a crap. No one in this book has given crap one about Ike Harris and his fate. Even after accepting that maybe, just maybe, Ike was on the money with his wacky theories, Mark never thinks about finding Ike or what's become of him. I mean, technically, the last time that Mark knew anything about Ike at all was when Ike tried to contact him telepathically when he was being smelted just before the party. And yet Mark still isn't concerned about him at all. There's an emotional connection that I am lacking with Ike Harris that makes this ending fall really flat. It's fairly interesting from a plot perspective, I'll give you that, but it is not interesting from a character perspective, and that's the thing that I'm honestly more interested in, so I'm kind of frustrated here. There is some interesting character work going on with Thena, though, which is good, because I hate this time jump thing that happens here. You're really going to tell me that a helicopter flew through New York, flooping city after kidnapping a bunch of weapons-developing scientists and no one has any idea which direction it went in or has made any progress in finding it in like 3 days? Or that Iron Man has waited 3 days to do a Google search on Cersei? Like, it feels like these moments are happening in time with everything else, except for our opening scene, which clearly takes place in the next day, but whatever, that's fine. It's totally separated from the rest of our narrative. It feels, though, like this moment is a contemporary moment, and Gaiman's script just messed things up. Like, don't put any mention of the time in at all, and then this scene plays fine. It's just a couple hours later, big whoop-de-doo. How are we tripping over these small story details when everything else works out okay? So anyways, Thena. We've got Mark, Cersei, and Druig wake up to their powers to varying degrees, and here we see Thena waking to hers. She stated previously in her blinding demonstration in issue 1 that making up weapons is second nature to her. Quote, it's more like remembering, end quote. Here, we see that this time, she is the weapon, and she is able to dispatch her captors quite readily. I like that, much like Mark, it happens really subtly. First, we've got the mental change of reading the situation and coming up with some options, and then comes the execution, and, as demonstrated by her conversation with Iron Man, Thena doesn't even realize that she has done this. It's almost like an out-of-body experience for her. That's super neat, and continues to show that awakening to these powers might be like relearning lost skills, but the eternal memories haven't just flooded back. I like her concern for her son. I like her kind of just over-machoing Iron Man here. That's how thrown he is by this scene happening. He doesn't even argue with her. He just yes ma'ams and takes her home. Before I bounce, I want to do a pitch of this issue. This is something that I haven't done in a while, but that rough opening just kind of inspired me, so please bear with me for a second. So first off, I would open issue 3 with Iron Man. Just do a quick page of him flying through the city when his armor systems are alerted to an unauthorized flight happening. He flies over to check it out, and we see the helicopter flying away. His armor then picks up the sound of gunfire, and he dives for the building, but then the world seems to stop. We would then cut to Mark, who goes through his super speed moment. It ends, Iron Man busts into the room, asks to speak to Cersei, and we see Mark peel off. The rest of the issue largely plays out as shown, getting us to the end of the Thena moment, which is where I would then insert Mark's ending conversation with Sprite. Mark would have already told his story, and then Sprite would be asking these intelligent questions, like, who were those 2 guys who took Ike? I don't know why I did a deeper voice for a character who's supposed to be an 11-year-old. And where is Ike Harris now? And then we would end on the final scene of Icarus being remade or whatever it is that's happening there. That would allow Mark's story so far to connect through the end of this issue and bring us back to Icarus in a natural story way. It also keeps our focus on the bigger narratives of the story so far, drawing us forward into the next issue. This just flows a little better. As always, I would like to point out that my pitch comes from a much easier place than writing a story firsthand. Gaiman had to produce this series on a monthly timetable without the benefit of getting to see it all laid out at one time like I get to. I don't know Gaiman's writing habits either, so I don't know how far ahead of the production process he was, but it is possible that he was right up to the wire. I just don't know. But I think that my version would flow a little bit better and it would present less of a tonal problem. The basics of Gaiman's issue work fine, and for the most part I am pretty pleased with this. It's just those details and some of those tonal issues just trip me up so hard on a book that honestly I had been enjoying. I like that the story is escalating rapidly, I feel like we're really getting into the meat of the story now. But I think that by pushing forward so rapidly, Gaiman is also losing sight of what story he's trying to focus on. Is this supposed to be Mark's story? Is it Ike's story? You could make an argument that is clearly the story of the Eternals, but that is such a big concept, and there are just so many characters, and some of them might be bad guys and not allies, and that's just a lot of stuff to cram into one issue of a book. I feel like I'm losing sight of the characters here, so hopefully our plot momentum won't drag us along too quickly, and maybe we can kind of catch back up with ourselves. Next time, Mark's visit with Sprite sheds some new light on his situation, and Ike Harris finds that his strange claims are all true. There's something wrong with the Earth, and only the Eternals can fix it. Join me next week for Comic Book Breakdown, episode 17.3, The Eternals Volume 3, Total Recall. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.